What's up, everybody? Welcome to the first Locked On Cardinals of 2022. Got a special guest today, Aram Leighton. We're talking Cardinals galore with him of Just Baseball, talking Cardinal prospects. He's playing GM for a little bit. It's going to be a good one, so stay tuned for a fun episode of Locked On Cardinals.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily St. Louis Cardinals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Cardinal fans? Welcome to today's episode of Locked On Cardinals. We have a very special guest, been on the show a couple different times, and it's Aram Leighton of Just Baseball Media. Aram, how you doing today?
Good. It's Cardinals week at Just Baseball, and I'm really excited to have this article out a little bit after. So I'm really appreciative of you having me on, and excited to talk some Cardinals.
Yeah, I'm excited too. It's been a little bit since we have you on, and you've changed roles a little bit since we've had you on. So why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about what you're doing now? And it's pretty neat, to be honest, with you guys, what Aram's doing. So why don't you give us a little bit of background into what you're doing now and how you kind of started this with a couple of other Locked On guys and guys that you know as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, I had really enjoyed hosting Locked On MLB Prospects and growing that out. And but during COVID, built out justbaseball.com, and it just got a lot of momentum, especially on socials and the podcast and all of those good things. And it started taking up a lot of my time, and I actually put the minor league broadcasting on hold to go all in on this. And unfortunately, recently had to step away from Locked On MLB Prospects just to be able to focus on everything on the Just Baseball side, but still doing a ton of prospect content as well as the top 10 prospects for the Cardinals system. That write-up's going to be up very soon. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that. So really just wanted to create a one-stop shop for baseball fans, such as baseball, where you can really get everything from MLB, prospects, college, collectibles, fantasy, betting, everything you could possibly want in the baseball world. And it's been really cool to see the reception so far.
Yeah, it's an awesome site. I recommend, if you, with not a lot of baseball news to talk about, you guys keep it pumped with content pretty often. You have a couple of podcasts out as well. One with Just Baseball and one with Jeff Conine, if I remember reading that correctly.
Yes.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about that too, and then we'll get to the Cardinal stuff.
Yeah. So the Just Baseball show is, of course, myself, my co-founder, and then our buddy Jack McMullen, who broadcasted for the Fort Wayne Tin Caps, the Padres org. And that show's been a lot of fun. It's been really awesome to see the numbers there. And then Jeff Conine, of course, 18-year big league vet, is one of our advisors and also co-hosts a podcast with me. And that show is a blast because Jeff just shoots a text to whoever. And, we just had Boog Shambi on, just published that podcast today. So very excited about that one. We had Jason Stark on a few weeks ago, but also Jeff's just recall of the 97 World Series, 03. We just talked about the Bartman game the other day. Just so absurd to be able to talk to somebody that was playing in the game about it. So it's a really awesome opportunity. And Jeff's an absolute rock star on the mic too. Two-time All-Star on the baseball field, but he's a stud on the podcast as well. So it's been really fun.
Well, that's awesome. You got a lot of good things going, a lot of fun content to pump out. So if you see Aram Leighton's name attached to anything, it's worth a listen or worth a read. So you mentioned that it's Cardinals week here at Just Baseball Media, and whenever the Cardinals went on the run of 21, as Dan McLaughlin put it, and play-by-play announcer for the Cardinals, you had published an article about let the Cardinals reintroduce themselves. It was posted late September. What was your impression from an outside standpoint of the Cardinals 2021 season to where they were in June to where they ended up in October?
Yeah, that was such a wild run for so many reasons because it wasn't like the Cardinals made some major acquisitions, right? Or it wasn't like Jack Flaherty came back and was healthy. Nothing that you would have expected would boost the team was really what boosted the team. It was really just kind of things coming together for them. But on top of that, the acquisitions of like Jay Happ and John Lester ending up paying dividends. I really, not to take anything away from those two lefties, that to do what they did, down in the twilight of their careers was impressive. But I think it was a level of them trusting that they could pitch to contact. And they knew that they had one of the best defensive teams in baseball history behind them. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but you're going to be hard pressed to find a much better defensive team than what the Cardinals had last year. And funny enough, the more I dive into it, as I'm looking at the article I'm working on now as a follow-up to that piece I put out when they were on their run, that should be out probably later today or tomorrow. They had, the Cardinals, the largest differential in ERA, their actual ERA, and xFIP. And for the people that might not be huge into analytics, it's just fielding independent pitching, which basically just takes the fielders out of the equation, and the X is the expected stat of it. So basically, based on the batted balls everywhere and the walks and things like that, what the expected ERA was, it was way higher than their actual ERA. And it kind of shows you how much the defense was able to just bail out pitchers. So the way I look at it from there is I'm like, okay, well, Steven Matz is better than both those southpaws, and he should see his stuff play up even more, or at least his effectiveness play up even more. I think the Cardinals need more arms, but I think last year was a really good example of how a really elite defense can really help a pitcher big time, especially in the confidence department and ability to just throw strikes and pitch to contact.
I totally agree. I mean, there's a lot of gold around that infield, and even in the outfield. I think Dylan Carlson's going to win a Gold Glove one day. O'Neill and Bader are both top notch, and you can go on and on. You can say what you want about Yadier Molina overall in 2021, but defensively, he's still, at least in terms of managing a pitching staff and the intangibles.
Oh, yeah.
But at the end of the day, home runs might be sexy, but catching the ball and throwing the ball still get outs, and you still need 27 outs to win a baseball game. And at the end of the day, that's what the Cardinals were able to do. And you mentioned the acquisitions. It's not like the Cardinals went out and were the Braves and got all those outfielders, or they went out and were the Yankees and spent some big time payroll and got some Joey Gallo and Anthony Rizzo. They were able to get the best out of what they got. And I was critical of that move. I highly criticized that move, or those moves, I should say, of getting J.A. Happ and John Lester, because I think it was an easily criticizable move. You have a team that's within striking distance of at least a wild card. They were within single digits amount of games, and they go out and get two guys that, again, all due respect to them, are in the twilight of their careers. But for what they gave the Cardinals, those moves ended up panning out quite well. And when you look at the offseason as it stands right now, obviously still in the middle of a lockout, but the Cardinals did make one splashy move, and that was to get Steven Matz. You mentioned him a little bit, but I want to get your impressions on that move, as well as you mentioned it a little bit. Let's go one question at a time. Well, what's your overall impression of the Steven Matz deal?
I love it because I thought that last year, in 2020, obviously it was a rough one for Matz. But you look beyond that, he's been what he was last year, right? And I'll take the sample size of 4 regular seasons over an abbreviated, hectic 2020. And not to mention, he was pitching for the Toronto Blue Jays, which in 2020, they weren't the Toronto Blue Jays. They were, wherever they were at the time, Blue Jays, which was Dunedin and all over, and Buffalo. And that's really difficult, especially when you consider that most of those stadiums in Dunedin and Buffalo are bandboxes, really difficult to pitch in. The thing with Matz is the health, right? And we want to see him be able to stay on the field, but he went 150 innings. And what stands out the most to me about this Cardinal staff that I was just awe-stricken is that you had Adam Wainwright go 200 innings, third most innings in Major League Baseball, which is incredible. Yeah. But they only had one other pitcher with more than 100 innings pitched. And that guy's a free agent in KK Kim, who I know you love. And I actually think the guy gets outs too.
Yeah.
That's one of the there's no way I can pull that. I'm a big stat head guy. I'm a big pull the crazy numbers guy. I don't even know how to pull that, but I know for a fact it's incredibly rare that you only have 2 pitchers with more than 100 innings on your staff, even in today's game. So I think the Matz acquisition is huge, even if he only gives you 150. But remember, if you're losing KK Kim, yes, he's better than Kim, but it does kind of soften that impact a little bit of adding a Matz. So it'll be interesting to see how they decide to proceed. But, it's kind of tough to see one guy out, one guy in. But Matz is definitely an upgrade nonetheless.
I think you look at it, too. I'm kind of old-fashioned in this, where I think it's good to have not all 5 right-handers in a rotation. I just think you have a 3-game series, you're going to see 3 right-handers. You're going to get in, even though they could be different right-handers, you just get in that mode of, okay, it's coming from, roughly the same slot, right? So I think throwing in a lefty in there kind of makes that rotation better in and of itself. You're also going to get likely Miles Michaelis back for a whole year and Dakota Hudson back, who impressed at the end of 2021. So, but Steven Matz, I think, like you said, is going to be able to use that defense. I did a New Year's resolution episode last week about the pitching, and I said sometimes the problems that we face are very simple. For the Cardinals' problems, it's a solution that we've heard since Coach Pitch, since middle school. Throw strikes. If this Cardinals staff can throw strikes and pitch to that defense, whether it's Paul DeJong or Mundo Sosa at shortstop, you're going to have gold or at least silver at every other defensive position on the field. So if you can just throw strikes and try and miss the barrel as much as possible, you're going to be just fine.
Quick break in the action to tell you about Built Bar. It is New Year, and that means New Year's resolutions. Maybe you want to get in shape. Maybe you want to eat healthier. Well, Built Bar is here to help you with both. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easy to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good you'll want to eat it, unlike other protein bars, which can be chalky, waxy, or taste like a chemical spill. Built Bars are covered 100% in real chocolate and contain 130 calories, 4 grams of net sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. That means it tastes really good and it's still really healthy. And even if you're not a huge fan of working out, you can still enjoy something that tastes good and is good for you. And that way you can enjoy a delicious Built Bar. You can almost count it as a workout. There's so many flavors to choose from, so go to Built.com right now and make your choice and get 15% off your order with our promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. I'm trying to eat healthier this year, so you know I've got myself some Built Bars. Head over to Built.com right now and use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order.
But when this lockout ends, I think no matter when it ends, it's going to be a flurry of moves made by any team. You had an episode out today on Just Baseball playing GM for the St. Louis Cardinals. And we're not going to go for another hour and 2 minutes, which is how long that podcast was. But what is, for you, what is one move, or the first move, I should say, what is the first move the Cardinals need to make out of the lockout?
Well, before I answer that, I kind of want to flip it back onto you. Is how much of a splash do you think that they could possibly make? Because I try to have as much of a pulse on every team situation as possible. And some don't really show their hands. So I like to kind of ask people that are close to the team, knowing what, knowing what they've done in the past and kind of their behaviors. Could you see the Cardinals making a big splash, or is this going to be more of a low key kind of move on the other side?
I could see, not to duck the question, but I could see it going both ways because I think the Cardinals are a team that keeps their cards close to their chest. Nobody knew about the Nolan Arenado deal until a day before. Nobody knew about the Steven Matz deal until 11:30 at night.
That's why I say that exactly.
Right. This isn't a team that has a lot of leaks. This team stays quiet. That this team, Jeff Carr of Locked On Reds are going to hate me for this, but this team does the Cardinal way. They put their nose to the grindstone. They go to work. So the only splashy move that I could see happening is Trevor Story. And a reunion at the shortstop position with Nolan Arenado on the left side of the infield. Paul DeJong and then Mundo Sosa, you could argue both of them are not starting caliber. You also could argue they both are. It's just a matter of where you want the Cardinals to spend their money because the Cardinals do have money to spend. They lost Dexter Fowler off the books. They're going to they got rid of Carlos Martinez and Matt Carpenter off the books. Andrew Miller, all these guys off the books. They have close to $35 million to spend. Minus the $11 million they're spending on Steven Matz. They still have money to spend. I think it's just a matter of where they're going to spend it. I love the Steven Matz deal, but if that's the only move they make this offseason, it's a loss, right? It has to be paired with other moves. And the reason I think Story is still likely, even after John Mozeliak has said Paul DeJong is going to get another shot, 3 days before Nolan Arenado was a Cardinal, John Mozeliak verbatim said that Matt Carpenter is going to start at third base. You just never know, So
See, that's why I ask you.
Right.
That's why I ask you. There's no way I would know that, right? But that's a perfect example of you have to ask the people that are close to the team because they know the behaviors. They know when the rhetoric is valid or when it's a little bit of GM speak. So that is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, no, I just think that the team needs arms more than I think they need bats. So I think that the splashy move will come at the offense, but there's an argument, I agree with this argument, that the more productive move will come in the bullpen or in the starting rotation. So I'll flip the question back around to you. What's move number one for the Cardinals, Arnold?
No, I appreciate that because honestly, the big thing that I'm writing about and so what we do is like a 3-man rotation on the podcast on the Just Baseball show. And so I was the odd man out for this Cardinals breakdown. And I shot them a text before, and I was like, I really don't think shortstop's that big of a deal right now. And they kind of pushed back on me, and I was like, look, you can talk about whatever you want on the episode, but this is what I think. Like, yes, Story would be great. But outside of that, I actually like what I saw from Edmundo Sosa. You have a good enough offense all the way around where even if he's a 700 OPS guy, but he's playing phenomenal defense and stealing bags and being athletic, that's great. But also Paul DeJong, like he plays above average defense. He still runs into baseballs. He still was almost a 2-WAR guy in a miserable year last year and shortened workload and had a 3 to 4 WAR for his first 3 seasons in baseball. I think you got to give him one more shot here. Obviously, if Story can be attained for a reasonable price, you go for it. If you get priced out of Story, I would way rather put those assets towards starting pitching and relievers, like you said, especially because you don't know totally what you're going to get from Alex Reyes next year, right? I'm hoping he's going to look more like the first half guy or even something between the first half and the second half guy, which I think is the most reasonable, belief. But who knows with somebody like that? You don't know what you're going to get from Jordan Hicks, though. It's incredibly exciting that he'll be back, and that is a big boost. You do lose Luis Garcia, who was great at the end of the year for you. There were some good moves that I like, and there were some moves to retain some guys that I like, but I definitely think that you got to address starting pitching. I would take a shot at Rodon. Obviously, that's one of the easy things to say, right? Is go take a shot. But I think they gave Matz multiple years to lessen the AAV of it, right? $11 million a year for Steven Matz is spectacular. It's absolutely 4 years for Matz is a long time. I think most teams are probably willing to go 3. And I think that's how they were able to steal Matz away from the Mets and some other teams.
One of 8 teams, what the reports were.
Right? It had to be the extra year. I have to think everybody's willing to go for $11 million a year for Steven Matz. So I'm looking starting pitching. I wouldn't rule out a trade. I know the Cardinals don't have the most loaded system in the world, but they have shown to have some more depth. I think they had a bunch of guys put it together offensively, which we'll talk about. And Nolan Gorman at this point, like I know people really like him, but he's getting a lot of run at second base. The Cardinals do have a lot of middle infielders, especially the second base type, especially if Sosa's not going to play shortstop. You still have DeJong under contract. You have Tommy Edman. There's more guys in the fold too. I almost wonder if you look to package a Nolan Gorman and some other guys, because there are some really good depth pieces to go get a Zach Plesac. That's something that I think you would see Cleveland be very interested in. And that would be the big splash, quote unquote, would be to go get and try and buy low on a Zach Plesac. I think he would be a huge get for the Cardinals. And I think he's going to bounce back big time next year. I don't know how Cardinals fans feel about making a trade, so to speak, since they do have the financial flexibility. So I'd imagine a trade is probably more unlikely, right?
Well, the counter to that would be that, yes, the farm system is a little depleted, for lack of a better phrase, but you've got some controllable pieces. You've got Dakota Hudson, who's still arbitration eligible. You're going to have Miles Michaelis under contract for the next 2 seasons. So you have Paul DeJong under contract for the next, I believe, 3. I believe it's until 2026, maybe 4. Blanking on that contract right now. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a minor league piece. You have controllable pieces. Now, are those pieces desired? Does anybody want a Miles Michaelis for 2 years? Does anybody want to pay Paul DeJong that kind of money? That's a different question. But I don't think that it has to be a top 3 prospect. And I don't think the Cardinals are willing to part with their top 3 prospects. We saw that in the Marcelo Zuna deal. We saw that in the Paul Goldschmidt deal. We saw that in the Nolan Arenado deal. The Cardinals didn't lose a top 3 prospect any of those deals. And those prospects have changed throughout those deals. I acknowledge that. But they're really high on their top 3 farm system prospects. And we'll get into that in a couple of minutes. But I think that the money is going to be spent. There's always going to be somebody that disagrees with how it's spent. Oh, you spent money on a bullpen arm. That sucks. But at the end of the day, the bullpen struggled in the middle part of the year because you had 3 arms that you could rely on. Genesis Cabrera, Alex Reyes, and Giovanni Gallegos. Called them the big 3 in May and June. And then, or in April and May. And then June and July hit, and they were overworked. Starters were averaging about 4 innings a game at that point in time. They ended up averaging just over 5. You saw struggles happen. You saw guys not be effective. TJ McFarland and Luis Garcia came in and settled things down. TJ McFarland was a double play machine. Yep. You mentioned the moves that they retained. TJ McFarland was one of those arms. I think the Cardinals need another lefty to replace Andrew Miller, and they need a right-handed reliever. I would love a Joe Kelly acquisition and a Brad Hand or Andrew Chafin type deal, or even a Ryan Tepera from the right side.
I love Tepera. That was going to be the first guy I was going to say is Ryan Tepera. I think fits right in because that just proven arm at this point. Because yes, Tepera was not quite the guy that he's been the last year and a half going back in the earlier days of his career. But I think at this point you can see the swing and miss, especially after last year. Like Tepera's for real. And I would love to see someone with a little bit more experience, in the back of that bullpen, because I do think that there's some big time upside with a lot of these arms, but they need a little bit of just baseline, right? Like veteran and of course it's a volatile position for everybody involved. Funny enough, the other episode we recorded on the Just Baseball show the other day was, is paying relievers worth it? Right. And what we decided is, it's different case to case, but if you're a young, talented bullpen, you can still go get a veteran for relatively cheap. And I even think a Chafin, like you said, or a Brad Hand, who aren't quite where they were at the peak of their career, I at least give you that veteran presence that I think is still essential in a bullpen, though it's less emphasized.
I agree. And I think that, as exciting as Gallegos and Cabrera and Hicks and even Helsley, and I like Cody Whitley, who's a prospect that's coming up. I like all those guys. I love Cody Whitley. I really do. He came on, his last 10 innings of the year were spectacular. I love Cody Whitley. As exciting as those guys are, a lot of these guys, Giovanni Gallegos is probably the most veteran bullpen arm you have, and I think that you need a veteran presence. Joe Kelly might not be the wisest of people. He's still a little hoot and a holler, but Joe Kelly could be that veteran presence, or Ryan Tepera, like you mentioned. And Brad Hand has been around the block. Brad Hand has won and saved some baseball games. You just have to wonder, is Brad Hand the kind of guy that to relinquish the closer role? He's been a closer for arguably most of his, if not all of his career. So, or do the Cardinals want him to be a closer? But in my opinion, Giovanni Gallegos has earned that role. Before we get to the prospects, I want to ask, we talked about a little bit, who's one bullpen arm of the Cardinals that you looked at that you're most excited for heading into this following season?
Well, that's a great question.
There's a lot of them. I think there are a lot of them that you could pick, in my opinion.
I mean, the obvious choice is Hicks, just because what he does is like, sorcery. And watching that guy throw is just so fun when he's healthy, and we've been deprived of that. Like, I could watch. It shouldn't be legal to do what he does with the baseball, right? You shouldn't be able to throw 102 with sink. So I'm super excited to see that and hope he's healthy. But I actually think Gallegos can turn himself into, one of. I see him getting better and better, and I think he could turn himself into one of the better relievers in the game. I really think if he puts it all together, he can do that. And if that's the case, that's a really fun guy to watch. So that's another name I'm watching. I'll take you a step further. Somebody that, I don't even know when he'll fully be in the fold. I know he was selected to the 40-man, and he was made his way up to AAA by the end of the season. Freddie Pacheco. Yeah. I'm really hoping I get to see some Freddie Pacheco at the big league level. 23-year-old who, obviously comes with some command issues, but I thought made some major improvements in that regard. And he's disgusting. Like, he is disgusting. I'm talking like 99, 100 with a ridiculous breaking ball from a low release point at 5'11", 200 pounds. He's electric and could be another stud in the back end of that bullpen.
He was on the Arizona Fall League All-Star team, wasn't he? Or All-Team? That name rings a bell from the Arizona Fall League, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, I think that the Cardinals might not have the most loaded farm system, but I'm still excited about this farm system, and I think that we could see the top three make their debuts in 2022. You said this is Cardinals week, as we talked about on JustBaseball.com, and you're a prospect guy, minor league play-by-play voice, former host of Locked On Prospects, prospect guy. So you know your stuff. That's why I love having you on about prospects. I'm not asking you to spoil the order of the top 10 or the top 3 even, but who are some top prospects that you're excited about for the Cardinals and what you're expecting from them in 2022?
So what I will spoil is how outrageously obsessed I am with Jordan Walker. You can lock that guy in for number one, which, if anybody even goes to justbaseball.com and goes to our top 100 prospect list, you'll see where Jordan Walker is. And we're updating that list. And so I'm doing each individual team. And then once I'm done with the team rankings, then I update the top 100 list. But with how high Jordan Walker is, you just know he's going to be number one on the Cardinals top 10. He's not a human being.
No, he's so good.
He's unbelievably good, and I watched hours and hours and hours of him over the last few weeks defensively too, funny enough. And I think his glove even plays enough at third base. Yeah, he makes some errors, but I was really impressed with how well he moves over there for a 6'5" kid. He is going to be incredibly special. And I think he's way more advanced than a lot of people thought, which is really exciting as well. But somebody that I was really excited about was Nick Plummer, because some people might be like, oh yeah, he's 25 and finally just was beating up on younger competition. You'll see with my write-up on this, but I'm sold on the Nick Plummer improvements. This isn't just some guy that just has been around for a while and just finally was able to get acclimated to beating up on younger competition. This is a guy who overhauled his swing dramatically and overhauled almost everything he's got going on there. He's a freak athlete and really figured out how to control his body a lot better. I'm sold on what I saw from him offensively. And yes, he has to do it at the big league level. But for a guy that was one of the worst hitters in the minor leagues for a few years to do what he did last year, I watched all of his swings and saw the changes he made. I'm really impressed with what he was able to do and the improvements he made in the box. So that's one of the more underrated guys. And then, of course, Alec Burleson. I interviewed him.
He lit it up. Yeah.
We have an article on justbaseball.com, a sit-down interview I did with Burleson, and he's got the approach, he's got the ability. But something that just is so insightful that he said to me that I just you don't even think about on the outside is that he's like, yeah, I was a two-way player at East Carolina. As a pitcher, you don't want to do too much insanely daunting upper body workouts and things like that. So I was never really putting on major hitter strength. The second I put the pitching on hold and went all in on hitting in professional baseball, I was able to put on that offensive player strength. And I'm seeing it translate at the plate. And it's just crazy to see things like that. And then you see it, in the stat sheet, it makes sense. So Burleson's a guy I really like too as a person, but really like the swing as well. And he's got what it takes between the years.
I think there's a lot of intriguing options. I'm going to get two more questions. And first of all, with Jordan Walker, I think it's intriguing. The Cardinals had just traded for Nolan Arenado, and then they draft Jordan Walker. Or vice versa. They draft Jordan Walker with their first overall pick, a third baseman at the time. Where do you think Jordan Walker fits in the mold? Not this year, obviously, but maybe 2023, 2024, with the possible DH coming. Do you see Jordan Walker pushing Nolan Arenado to DH, Jordan Walker to DH, Jordan Walker to first base? Where do you see him? You mentioned he has a good glove. Where do you see him fitting in with this Cardinal team defensively?
Yeah, so that's the $1 million question, right? And, what I was expecting to see a flat-footed guy that, might not move too well. Yes, he had some instances where he looked like an 18-year-old playing, high A third base. But for the most part, I was so impressed at his ability to make plays ranging to his left, to his right, different arm angles, throwing on the run, how quick he was able to move. For that reason, I think he's capable of sticking at third. But obviously, you're not going to displace arguably the best defensive third baseman since Brooks Robinson from their position. So what I was actually really impressed with is that he moves well. He has a massive arm. I'm talking like 70 grade plus arm, maybe even more than that. He could easily anchor a corner outfield spot, I think, in the meantime. Yes, of course, he can play first base.
Right.
Yes, he can DH. But I actually think, and that might be not the most common opinion ever, but I've seen a lot. And with that arm on top of it, I think he could anchor a corner no problem. If they really needed him to. But, he's still probably 2 years plus out. I still think Arenado is going to be picking it in 2 years. So, yeah, that's probably going to be the case. I could see him move to a corner outfield, but I think he would be more than fine out there.
At some point, that bat's going to play no matter where he gets in, whether it's first, third, outfield, or even catcher. Who knows? Yeah. Jordan Walker's going to get in. Right. Final question about the prospects, and then we'll get wrapped up here. It's about the time. Very simple. Do we see Matthew Liberatore and Nolan Gorman at the major league level in 2022?
Liberatore, I think 100%. I think he does need another 5, 6, 7 starts in AAA, see how things go. I think he's still filling out his arsenal. That curveball that's so majestic, I think people are starting to realize it's more just majestic. And the sliders actually is more effective pitch, even though the curveball is aesthetically pleasing. He started using the slider way more down the stretch and had more success. It's hard to have success with 70 miles an hour, no matter how much movement or break it has. And I think he's figuring out how to use his arsenal more. Another handful of starts, I actually think he could be a solid rotation piece for them. Next year, yes, he'll have some growing pains, but could help. Gorman, It's more so where does he fit in, right? I also really feel like he needs to work out on the lefty things. He needs to work through the lefty struggles. The
Okay.
left on left issues are just too egregious at this point. You don't want him to be limited in that regard.
Right.
Some guys never quite figure it out. I'd like to see him get another 200 plate appearances, 300 plate appearances to work through that. But I think it's going to take an injury to really see Gorman. Otherwise, I don't know if there's a purpose to really force him up. He is accelerated his process. But remember, he was a high school guy drafted a couple years ago. There's no rush here. You don't have to add him to the 40-man anytime soon. I would give it a little bit more time. I think you see Liberatore first.
Well, I mean, that makes that Randy Arozarena deal look a little bit nicer if you can get Liberatore in the mix a little bit sooner. But Aram, I appreciate you coming on at Cardinals Week of Just Baseball. Tell my listeners where they can find your work on Twitter and everything else. You got a lot of places to find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Aram Leighton 8, and of course on Twitter for Just Baseball at Just BB Media. We'll have the top 10 prospect list out tomorrow, and I should have my Cardinals just GM state of the team article out in the next couple hours as well. So can't thank you enough, Lucas, and big fan of all the work you're doing. And also, I got to connect with you because I want to get out to St. Louis for a ball game this coming season. One of the final stadiums I have to check off. So we'll have to connect at some point, but I really appreciate you, man.
Absolutely. Saving one of the best for last. There's no bad seat in Busch. That's what I always say. So
I can't wait.
It's going to be a good time. So thanks again, Aram. Cardinal fans, thanks for tuning in today. And until I talk to you guys the next time, be sure to stay safe, stay well, and have a fantastic rest of your day.